today we are talking to Csaba about our Mac course, EXP-312. Is that correct? 312?
Yes.
About Mac exploitation. So is this the same stream but a different topic? This is a new stream that's started for us to talk about this course and kind of go into a lot of different areas here. We're going to talk a little bit about Csaba, his background, where he's coming from, why he is our Mac exploitation expert, why he's the man when it comes to this sort of stuff, as well as what the course is set up like and how it can work for you, how what you can get out of taking the course, et cetera, et cetera. So we're gonna dive into it simply because we have an hour and I feel like we're gonna wind up wanting to talk. At least I'm gonna want to talk for more than an hour. So hello, Csaba. Let's start out with just like introduction with you. So you're a Mac guy, but like, so Mac as a platform. How did you get started with Mac OS? Like, what did you start on, like System 6.5? Like, are you old time pre OS 10 Mac user? Or like, where did you start out?
So hi everyone. So no, I actually came pretty new to the platform.
Uh-huh.
I don't remember when I had my very first Mac. Probably in the early 2010s.
Okay.
But it was horribly slow. It had a 5400 RPM hard drive, and it was really slow. And I actually gave it away. And I moved back to like a Windows platform with SSD, and then eventually I looked for a machine with some specs, and the Mac was the only one which satisfied my needs, and I switched back to a Mac at 2015 as a user, but I didn't start to look into its security stuff for a very long time. So that's actually only came, I think, like about 4 years ago.
Okay. Wow.
So pretty recent.
Wow. Did you do security work before you started with Mac OS security?
Yes. Yeah. So I did it for quite long time. I think so. Originally, I was a network engineer where I worked, and I think at 2012 I moved to our cybersecurity team.
Okay.
And I eventually joined a blue team there, and I was in that blue team for 6 years, I think, and then I moved to our red team, and for 2 years before I joined OffSec, and eventually during that red teaming period, I started to look into Macs, not because of our red teaming, because all of the environment was Windows, but just because of my interest. Really, so this is how I got into the Mac. But yeah, I had a long history of other security stuff. And I also did a lot of training during that blue team, red team period. Interestingly, I did mostly offensive related training and not defensive training when it came to security.
Nice. So when you made that migration to the Mac, did it feel different, doing security work? Like when you started focusing on the security part of it, like what was the major difference with all the experience that you've had in the, let's say, more traditional space that like a lot of people are familiar with? What was the major obstacles and challenges that you faced with moving over to the Mac there?
I took an entirely different approach when I started to learn Mac. There are multiple reasons to that. So when I started to learn like Windows stuff, I really only took trainings, but because I was in a blue team, I never really had the chance to actually practice all those offensive stuff, only slightly. And when I started to switch to Mac, there was no training on Mac at all.
Yeah.
So you are fully on your own. And what I started to do is I actually watched a presentation on a given subject, and I started to practice that small subject. And then when it was enough, I moved to another subject, another conference talk, where I learned some new stuff. I started to dig into that stuff, and then slowly started to build up everything one by one. Eventually, I bought books about how the Mac is working, like macOS internals stuff. But basically, because there is no training, you need to collect all the information on your own or research it on your own. So that's actually it's good and bad at the same time, that there is not much research on Mac, although it's growing, but still, if you want to compare it to Windows environment or web stuff, like it's a small chunk. Really, even if you look at big conferences like Black Hat US, there are like 2-3 talks, maybe 4, focusing on Apple as a whole, not just Macs but iOS. And then you have all the other more than 100 talks on different subjects. So it's good and bad, because it's bad, it's harder to pick up stuff, but it's also good that there is a lot of new areas that you can actually explore when going into this subject. And I also practice them much more than I used to before.
So I'll tell you, so the Mac and the Mac platform and I go back to high school, and the high school I was at, we had a bunch of old Mac Pluses that we used, and you could take home a computer when you had to do homework. You could check out a Mac Plus, and they had this big backpack, and you'd slug home this Mac, you'd hook it up, you'd hook up the external hard drive, you'd boot up off of floppy disks, and so like we had that, and then we had security in the Mac. So the computer network in this high school had it was an Apple Talk network, and it was the phone lines that were daisy chained together, where if you unplugged one computer, it ruined the entire network. We had that, and then they had these various different security items that they put on there to try to stop students from doing things. And honestly, my first experience with like computer security sort of items comes from high school, and like trying to cheat and loading up like how to run your own software on these supposedly lockdown Macs. And you'd have to you couldn't load an application, but you could load a desk accessory, because the desk accessories were a different type of item than a standard application back then, because they didn't have real multitasking yet. And so like it was one app at a time, except for the DAs. And so then we found I put together this desk accessory that used Apple Talk to dynamically generate a chat network, and so everybody that was taking the tests on the computer could like share answers and everything. So the Mac has always held a very special place in my heart. And then to couple that with same high school, the computer lab was always busy, and so you couldn't ever get on a computer, but they had a Next OS slab that someone had donated to the school. And so it was an old it was a slab running Next with the grayscale display, and that computer no one was ever on. And so that was free a lot, and I would use that. And I really didn't know what I was doing initially, but over time you learn, because that was the only computer you could use. And so I'd get some work done on it. And Next, being this combination of its own thing, as well as the Unix backend, et cetera, et cetera. It was very weird to me. And then, jump forward years ago, or years from there, when Apple was going through their change, and then are they going to buy BOS? Are they going to buy Next? You know, what's going to happen? And then they buy Next, and then that becomes their whole next, you know, no pun intended, operating system that they based everything off of, and the whole blue box and yellow box and all the stuff that they were doing with that. It was quite fascinating. But like that history that I have of like being there and experiencing all of that evolution, I think also has like tainted my view of the Mac in a certain way, where when I think about the architecture and the structure and whatnot, I think more in terms of a form of Unix, very similar to me, in my mind, modern Mac OS is a modern version of Next Step, just with a slightly different UI. But the base operating system, you know, the internals is very, very similar. At least that's the way I see it. Like you coming to the Mac essentially once, you know, that transition was already accomplished and the OS was already established. Like what's your perspective about the internals of the Mac compared to like Windows and Linux and Unix and that sort of thing? Like where do you put that? Like how do you conceptualize that?
So just one thing on this merge, as
Uh-huh.
I read, again, I have no history on Macs, but as I understand from write-ups, it's basically you have the next OS, the next step as the base or the kernel layer, and the old Mac OS as the GUI layer. So this is how they merged together. So yeah, you really have an old next step with a new
Yeah.
GUI eventually, and this is how they groove. But to your question, how was it different from Windows? I think Apple is what's really key, I think, in this platform is that Apple is really heavily relying on code signing, and that's the base of all of their security mechanism, basic code signing. From you go from a trusted root, the Apple root certificate, and basically everything ties back to that, and all the permissions, they call it entitlements. So basically they have some sort of very granular permission control. Basically, they can assign entitlements like rights to given processes based on code signature, and then whether you can do something or not on the platform is no longer tied to your regular user ID or being root, but it's tied to your code signature, to your entitlements. And there are like hundreds of these entitlements, and they can really granularly control what each process can do on the platform. Even if they run as root, they can really fine tune which part of the OS they can access, whether it's file system, processes, whatever. And I think this is the key or the biggest difference between Windows, Unix, and the Mac.
Interesting. So listening to you explain that, it makes me think a little bit. Did you ever get a chance to use there used to be versions of Solaris that were like the higher end security versions of Solaris, where you could I forget, I don't know if anyone in chat would be able to remind me, but what it was called. But there was that higher end version of Solaris that was used in high security environments, essentially the ones that remember the old like red book, yellow book, blue book, you know, sort of items when it comes to government classification and whatnot. And so you could classify different processes in different environments in order to maintain isolation between areas. Did you ever get a chance to, I'm describing it very poorly, but you never got a chance to use one of those?
No.
Yeah,
no.
Interesting. So I had to administer one of those a little bit years and years back, and that was a huge pain in the rear end. Like all of those permissions and all of that structure, just to get basic functionality out of that was tough as hell. But what you describe on the modern Mac is sounds like a different implementation, but a similar sort of level of control, but it's also abstract and hidden from the end user. Like how do you, like, number one, when you use the Mac with your background and the you obviously don't approach it as a standard user does, but like when you're does that aspect of inheritance and permissions and code signing, is that always in your face, that you notice that, like, just a regular user, it's they don't pick up on? Like, how where do you see that really becoming most apparent and visible to the user?
I think to the user, it comes out in a few places. Like, for example, so the user will not see it as a code signing item or that it's a code signature. What the user will see that with macOS Catalina or Mojave, Apple introduced DCC, the privacy framework. So now you need to grant application access to your camera, to your microphone, to your documents folder, to whatever. There is a huge list of these items. And basically users have to manually grant these right by acknowledging on the pop-up. Right. And then the user will see that, okay, let's say Zoom has access to the camera, and there is a list the user can review where it will list the macOS will list the application itself. So the user will not see the code signing aspect of this thing, but the user will see that, okay, I can whitelisted or put this application on an allow list item, and basically this is done by code signing. Or another item is keychain, where you can again grant, let's say, I'm a developer and I will give X code and always access my certificate in my keychain, because I don't want to type my password every single time. And then in the keychain, it will show you that, okay, X code can access your certificate, basically for building and code signing operation. But the user will have a list of again of given applications that can do or access certain resources. So I think, as for the average user, this is where this becomes visible, but they never see. So it's transparent in a way that they don't really deal with code signing. If you are a developer now, that's another question, because when you are developing an application, then you actually need to take care of these entitlements. So if you are developing an application to the App Store, first you have to sandbox your application. So that's no question. But if it's sandboxed, then in the sandbox profile or under the sandbox entitlement, you have to give it certain rights. Okay, does my application need, let's say, network access from the sandbox? If yes, then you need to give that network specific entitlement to your application when you are developing it. Because if you don't, then it will not have access to the network. And so on. So if you are a developer, you will actually see this stuff. Also, if you develop, let's say, endpoint security client application, you actually have to request certain entitlements from Apple, and you need to get some, I think they call it provisioning profile, where they actually approved your ID to use that entitlement. Otherwise, it will not work. So if you are a developer, then this becomes much more visible.
That makes sense. That makes sense. In terms of, so you've been with the Mac through multiple different versions of the operating system. How would you say that the maturity of that security engine has changed over time? It
improves. I think it becomes more and more restrictive. and they try to close gaps that we people who do bug research or security research on this platform find, because sometimes you set up these rules, but for example, a very common attack when it comes to code signing is a downgrade attack. What you can do is, let's say I want to attack Zoom or whatever application, maybe the latest, and Zoom has access to your camera. Now, on the latest Zoom, you cannot inject your code and you cannot do anything by default with the application. But if you take like a 4-year-old Zoom client, which can still work, it has the same code signature. You can inject code into that application simply because it's old, and because 4 years ago there was no hardening for third-party applications. So basically you can downgrade the application, inject your code, and because the operating system tracks applications based on their code signatures, because it's the same, you can potentially gain more stuff. So Apple is trying to close such gaps in the design, and it's not easy. So this downgrade attack, it's not like an easy to fix vulnerability. It's a design change to the entire platform, how they address it. So it's becoming more and more mature. They are also closing many of these similar gaps where they realize that there is a pattern here in terms of vulnerabilities. So they are raising the bar with that. Also, they also, what they started a few years ago, they also want to get everyone outside of the kernel space. So basically no third parties in the kernel.
Compared to Windows, Linux, I don't know if this is a fair thing to say, but if 1 through 3, Mac OS, Windows, Linux, what's most to least secure, in your opinion?
And
you can also refuse to answer if I'm not being fair.
No, I usually say that I think all of them are secure about the same way. I think each of the platforms are maturing and becomes harder and harder to exploit. I think each of them tries to address stuff in a different way many times. I think there is a big advantage on the Windows side is because it's being more popular. There are much more people looked into vulnerabilities on that platform, and potentially more stuff has been revealed already compared to the Mac platform. But I think it depends on your threat model. I think each platform is breakable. Like we see vulnerabilities on each of these platforms every month. So each of them have vulnerabilities that can compromise the system. I think it's very hard to decide which is better. I think they are different, but overall, I think for the average user, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, very diplomatic. Well done. So what about the recent change to Apple Silicon? How has that, do you notice a change to that, or is that hardware change irrelevant for the security work that you've been doing?
It is relevant. So the Apple Silicon, although it's the same OS running on Intel and the Apple Silicon, the same OS on the Apple Silicon is much more restrictive already than on the Intel version. I think there is a convergence between macOS and iOS, so they kind of moving to the same direction to make the same restrictions or similar what you have on iOS. One huge difference, for example, which came with Ventura, with the latest release, is actually it's specific to these downgrade attacks on the Intel OS or the Intel version of the OS. You can still use the old version of Apple binaries. Like you can take a binary from macOS Big Sur and like an Apple system binary from Big Sur and run it on Ventura, and it will run. Most of the time it will run just fine, unless it's forbidden specifically. Now on Apple Silicon, that's no longer true. If it's an Apple signed binary, then it has to be on that OS in order to run. So if I take any other Apple signed binary from any other older OS, it will not run. Yeah, it will be killed. So there is a list. It's called a trust cache. Basically, there is a list of binaries supplied with the OS, and they say, okay, these are the Apple signed binaries that can run, and nothing else. So that's for example one difference. And I think the Intel version of the OS has a few more years to be with us, but eventually it will go away. I think it's sooner than later.
So you're definitely feeling the security improvement from the platform change.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. How have you worked with iOS, iPadOS very much at all?
Not really.
No. Is that interesting to you, or you just haven't got to it yet? Like why, or is it, like what's kept you from there?
It is interesting. I don't know. I just somehow never got to it. Probably because of time. Time constraints. I did read a lot about it, and a few years ago I did look into it a little bit, just to be a bit familiar. So iOS and macOS, so eventually they are really similar. So they use the same code base. There are differences here and there, but it's hard to give a percentage. But let's say, I don't know, 70-80% is about the same on both platforms. Actually, on all of the platforms, like the iPadOS, tvOS, and all of their OSs, they use the same kernel, the XNU kernel. They use Darwin. They have the same stuff. Maybe one has some different daemons than the other. Maybe one is more restricted than the other. Like iOS is much more restricted than like macOS, but eventually the way they work is very, very similar. So if you learn macOS, you have a big jump start to start doing stuff on iOS.
Makes sense. So over the years, you've had a number of call them high profile, impactful items that you found that you've been able to share with Apple. Like, can you talk a little bit about what your relationship with Apple has been like, with how they've been to work with when it comes to security issues? What are you allowed to say without the Apple police coming after you? Yeah.
No, they won't. I think nowadays we have a pretty good relationship. I think
Nowadays,
mostly
did it not start well?
I wouldn't say it didn't start well. It just started where everyone else starts. So like
yeah.
So when and it's not generic to their security team, but basically everything that is Apple. When we submit a bug or a vulnerability to Apple, you get a response like immediately that it's probably an automatic template from their team. But then like months pass till you even hear from them. And even if you send them emails, hey, do you have any news on this? Or they just don't reply. And I think this started to improve lately, especially now they have like a dedicated platform to submit vulnerabilities. So they no longer rely on emails. I mean, you can still do emails, but now you have like a nice web UI where you can actually track the status of your ticket and the vulnerabilities, if it was fixed, when it will be fixed, and all this stuff. So it takes a whole lot of patience to communicate with Apple, and not just the security. And I think it's getting better, but it's still far from being good. So their other teams is the same, or I would say worse. Like I had to request an endpoint security entitlement at one point, and that's their developer team who deals with that part. And like I requested it, and I didn't get it, and they didn't even reject it. There was just void.
Wow. Just ignored you.
no replies, and 10 months passed while I eventually got they approved it, and I got it eventually. But I was ranting on Twitter, and I know they read my my Twitter feed, so that might help at that point. But yeah, communication is not their strength. Now I think they are more responsive, and one reason might be because they now know me much better than like 3 years ago. We even met in a few conferences now. So and I think that's good. Like having a personal meet, and just to have like a casual discussion has building this relationship.
Makes sense. That makes sense. Can you talk about any of your submissions at all that you've made to them? Anything that you could share?
Yes. So basically, any of them which is fixed, people are.
How many do you have open that are not fixed?
Open somewhere 20-ish range.
Wow.
These are smaller, larger issues. Yeah, but so they have very open policy. So once it's fixed, you can talk about it. So like you don't even need to request that. You are free to publish a blog, talk about it, whatever. So that works very well. And actually, there is one thing that works very well on their vulnerability disclosure program, that usually if you submit a vulnerability, you have time to provide more POCs or more explanation even at a later date. Like you provide some initial info, but if you, let's say, can provide a POC just 6 months later to bump up your reward, they will still accept it.
Nice. So that's kind of a good segue into the Mac course that you've made for OffSec. So have some of the submissions that you made to Apple shown up in the course?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So you're saying if people want details, they can go through the course. That's what I'm hearing. So let's talk about the Mac course. Like to a lay person, how would you describe the course? What can someone get out of the course when they sit down and take it?
I think 3 items mostly. So it's an introduction to the macOS world and from an offensive perspective. And so the first item, I think we do teach a lot of macOS internal stuff in the course, how just stuff works there. Although so I don't want to say that it's an internals course, because it's not. But I think in order to understand how you can bypass all these security controls in the OS, you need to understand how those stuff work, to know how to work around. So I think in order to understand or research how to find new bypasses for the sandbox, you need to understand, at least on the base level, how the sandbox is working, how it's structured. And the same for all. We call the course control bypasses, because so macOS has all these security controls like the sandbox, TCC, privacy, SIP, system integrity protection, and all of these. And so to know how to bypass them, or to know how to research how to bypass them, you need to understand how they work to some extent. So internals is one thing. Then exploitation, we are focusing on logic vulnerabilities. So I think everyone who takes the course will have a decent knowledge of logic vulnerabilities and how to approach vulnerability research in that aspect. And the third thing is a little bit of pen testing or red teaming, although it's not a red teaming or pen testing training. We do have a module which tries to show, okay, you have some initial code execution on the Mac in a sandbox, how you go from there and fully compromise the system, like in a real pen test. So you need to escape the sandbox, then you need to bypass privacy controls, you need to elevate your privileges, and we also show some kernel code execution. So we do a full compromise.
Nice.
So again, it's not a pen testing course, but we still try to show how all this stuff that we teach through in the entire course builds up, and how you can use that knowledge on engagement.
I've done a lot of pen testing over the years, and it's not very often that you come across Mac systems that you get into. It's not like every day, but I've certainly wound up with shells on various different Mac systems, and that was always kind of like one of the biggest challenges. Is now that I'm in here, what do I do? Like you could. What was it? Is like the say command to get the Mac to talk, something that you've done. So like that was always like the most interesting item, is like freak somebody out, like, please type in your password immediately, and then hopefully they do something. But so somewhat not a lot of options for me in those types of circumstances. It sounds like with this courseware, it kind of walks you through, when you wind up in that situation, what you can do that's more productive than just having the Mac talk to somebody.
Yes. We on the other hand, we don't go into all these general, let's say, red team or pen test trick that
Right.
how you give a pop-up to the user and try to convince the user to type in their password. So we don't go into stuff like this. We also don't use red team tools like Mythic, which is really good, but we stick to the shell because we don't want to teach the tool itself on the training. I think if you can use the shell or basic commands, you can also go and use the tool if you need it on an engagement. So if you know the basics, you will not have issues with having a more dedicated tool for this stuff. So yeah, so basically internals exploitation and a little bit of pen testing, but it's mostly focusing on exploitation stuff.
Makes sense. Also, looking at the course description online, I see one of the things that jumps out at me is writing shellcode for macOS. What's that like? Is it full custom shellcode, or what are you doing with that?
Yeah, so we actually, I think that's not the only module where we do assembly, but the most assembly heavy module. So we actually teach how to build, how to write shellcode in assembly on macOS. The reason for that is that we will need to write, or we will need to use shellcode during code injection in other modules. So we need to know how to build shellcode, but we don't do memory corruption exploitation at all on the training. But we still need the shellcode.
Yeah. So is that x86 or is that Apple Silicon, or how is that?
So right now it's x86 or x64. So we actually only went with the 64-bit version. We have plans to make an Apple Silicon version of this module on the long run.
Nice.
Because there is more and more Apple Silicon out there.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely something that, like, in our other courses, take like Pen 200 for example, we're finding a lot of students that are coming to the course running Apple Silicon systems, and obviously Cali, runs on ARM, and so Cali on those Apple Silicon systems is not an issue. However, not every application runs perfectly, and so like a good example of that is Burp Suite. The in-browser, the built-in browser to the Burp Suite proxy is an x86 x64 version, and so it doesn't use like the native installed browser when it operates. It uses its own embedded one, and it won't work. So there's little things like that which causes some issues, but overall it works pretty solid, and we certainly feel that the problems that come up are ones that can be worked around pretty easly by the student. We have some documentation in the student help center, as well as in the Cali docs, in terms of running Cali on Apple Silicon. But we definitely see that uptick in usage and adaptation of the system, and it's certainly gone very mainstream. So that's something that I've been keeping an eye on, specifically because of Cali. Making sure that Cali can run appropriately on there is very important.
I think it's a very, very decent platform. So I have an M1 as well, and it just doesn't heat up at all. Its battery can last for like more than a day, probably. And even if you run a VM, like the fans are not blowing up. It's not hot at all. Like, and even if working for hours, you just had like 10% drop, and so it's insane what they did. So I really like it, honestly. And I just read that they now introduced Rosetta, which is the tool for their platform to run Intel binaries on Apple Silicon.
Yeah.
Now you can install it in a Linux VM on Apple Silicon, and it will allow you to run x86 binaries inside the VM on Linux.
Now,
using Rosetta. I never tried it.
We were there first. Cali, within Cali, we had a doc put together that allows you to run x86 code on Cali in ARM, all versions of ARM. So Raspberry Pi as well as Apple Silicon and, you know, all that sort of thing. And so we beat them. I feel like Apple copied us. That's my prediction there is that Apple saw the massive success we were having with Cali running x86, and they were like, we need to get on that as well. Yeah. See, I see Steve in chat, you know, jumping in there. Yeah, for sure. So you know, good on you, Apple, for following the leader there. So I assume they're there because they read your Twitch or your Twitter. So of course they're, you know, so Apple, we're watching you. We see what you have going on. But no, I agree in terms of the platform. But maybe this is like wildly off topic, but maybe you might be able to explain. It feels like when you're using an Apple Silicon platform, it seems like the RAM consumption is different than a traditional like x64 system, where it's almost as if the and maybe this is just perception, it has nothing to do with reality, but it feels like the RAM goes further on a Apple Silicon system than what it does on a 64-bit Mac, just comparing apples to apples, so to speak. It just like, because I was always RAM constrained with more RAM on a traditional 64-bit Mac, but now I have like what is this, like a 16 meg M1, and I'm never RAM constrained on here. Like, do you have any perspective into that at all?
Honestly, I don't. I never looked into the consumption.
Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting. Might be, but I honestly don't know.
Or it could just be, I don't know what's different there. If like when you load up an application, if it loads into memory as smaller, if it's just, maybe it's the greater degree of efficiency between the memory and the hard drive. So when you swap, you know, when you use swap, it's a lot faster than the older systems. I mean, there's any number of variables I think that could come into play there, but the end result is yeah, you got this mega fast system that is pretty cheap compared to other systems that and then the fan's never running and the battery lasts forever. So that's pretty nice. So when it comes to like the putting together the course initially, excuse me, what was the biggest challenge that you encountered in constructing this for online delivery?
First of all, writing it. So I never wrote before really. So actually for me, writing a course was a challenge in itself. Specifically for online delivery, I think our biggest challenge was to how we provide online labs for a Mac.
Makes total sense, because the virtualization of a Mac has to be done on a Mac, right? Like at least
yes. So we actually had to look for other vendors than we use for Apple virtualization, and like Apple data center or Mac-based data centers to provide online labs and to run everything legally, and not like doing Hackintosh on some Windows-based virtualization environment or other environment. So yeah, I think finding these and setting it up in our infrastructure for this, probably that was the biggest challenge in this course compared to the others.
I remember when that was happening. I mean, I remember both on the content and infrastructure side that was a lot of new new items, you know, to try to get that set up appropriately. That certainly, I kind of expected that answer from you, honestly. I like, because like anytime something's outside of your control and you got to deal with a third party and that sort of thing, that just inherently creates more challenges. I mean, you have all the technical aspects of, oh, how do I sandbox escape? How do I, you know, play with the kernel? But at least that's in your control. You know, you can work with that directly. So
yeah, and we are heading to the same direction right now, because to run an Apple Silicon VM, you have to run it on Apple Silicon.
And also the virtualization infrastructure is just it's immature, I think is a good way of calling it on Apple Silicon.
Yeah, so I think someone named it lightweight. So you have to run the OS, and then on top of the operating system, you can run a virtual Mac. So you cannot do something like a VMware vSphere layer and run the VM on top of that. You actually have to run the OS, and you have to run the VM inside the OS. It works very well for like desktop environments and if you are a developer, but for us, where you have to provide an online lab, there is simply no solution today. There are no Mac servers, or like there are M1 based Mac minis that many vendors use for like in data centers. But there is no virtualization software or management software which will allow you to deploy virtual machines or just handle all of this stuff. So yeah,
it's funky because the Apple Silicon has I don't know, it's, how would you word it? It's like a native virtualization item, right? That wasn't on the 64-bit version, but it's just it's not like exposed with an interface at this point. Is that a fair way to describe it?
Yeah, so they have a virtualization framework in the OS that you can use once the OS is loaded. And that's it. And even if you use that VM on the OS, you have limitations, like you cannot log into iCloud from the VM.
Oh, interesting. I didn't realize that.
I never tried, but I read that that's an issue, and I don't remember, but there is some explanation why it actually doesn't work. So you can only log into iCloud from your main OS, but not from the VM.
I could see that. I wonder if it has something to do with the what is it, like you got that security chip, I forget what they call it now, but
Secure Enclave, I think.
Yes, since it doesn't have the enclave, it wouldn't surprise me if the enclave was necessary for iCloud interaction.
I don't remember. But it's something like this.
That makes
so it's
sense.
something how it authenticates to iCloud. So it's somewhere around this topic.
Do you feel like there's a chance that Apple is moving in the direction of running some applications in a virtualized container using this engine as like a next steps for the security of their operating system?
No, I think no.
No.
I don't see that. So yeah, I think they already have a very well built system to how to again restrict certain processes to do what they needed, kind of sandbox it, put it that way, or restrict it with entitlements. I don't see that they will run it. It already runs inside a container. It's not, but so it's already.
It's not a container, but the permissions kind of
yes,
like,
it's already locked down pretty much.
So
So
you think the overhead of the virtualization would not necessarily provide a value considering the protections that are already in place?
Yeah.
Yeah, fair. There's a lot of things I want to ask you, but we're like running out of our hour. In terms of the course, obviously, I will say I've said this multiple times on like our Discord office hour, that sort of thing. That if I had time to take a course right now, this is 100% the course I would take. Because I'm wildly interested in, I've always enjoyed alternative operating systems and the less popular sort of items and the different approaches and the way things are done, and getting involved in this at this level is always something I've wanted to do. And so maybe sometime I'll get a chance. I don't know that that's going to happen, but that would be my desire. So I'm definitely envious of anybody that does get the time to kind of dive into here. In terms of, like, you mentioned that some Apple Silicon stuff is coming. Anything else you want to tease as far as future work that you have coming that might show up in before you answer, let's also let everybody know that with this course, as we do updates, we're in a good position where we don't have to like just come out with a new version of the course. Instead, what we can do is we can update particular modules and add modules to the course. And so that it keeps it ever evolving, ever growing, ever improving. And so, like, in that spirit, like what might be coming that people could look forward to?
Yeah, so that's right. First, it's a rolling update. So we already had one update to the course in terms of what is coming. So we pretty much finished the course when we were at the Big Sur era. I think Monterey just came out or was about to come out when we published the course. And now we are with Ventura, which is 2 versions ahead of our course. So basically what we plan now is to update it, or let's say bring it up to speed to Ventura.
When you do that, is the thing that you dealt with Apple on Ventura, is that gonna be in there?
Yeah, so we actually add new vulnerabilities to the training. So the plan is basically to keep all the vulnerabilities we teach now. So we don't want to drop any of them. So we just want to extend them with new ones, and basically update where it's needed for the latest OS. Now, again, that shouldn't hold back anyone from taking it now, just to wait for the update. So we'll probably go through all the modules one by one and release them as we update them. But really the biggest thing is that from Big Sur to Ventura, there wasn't like a huge major change. Like, all the things we teach will still work in Ventura. Some stuff might work a little bit differently just because the OS is newer, but the concepts are still the same. So like, even if they take with the Big Sur centric version, all the concepts still applies. Like, the sandbox still works the same way as it worked 4 version before. All the techniques, obviously the vulnerabilities are fixed, but they were fixed anyway before. I would say most of the concepts, almost all of them, still work on Ventura. There are some new restrictions, again, coming in or came in with Ventura, that makes our life harder, which is, I think, good from a security point of view, because the OS is more secure, but it's harder from a vulnerability research perspective. So we basically try to add those new restrictions as well, and basically new case studies. But the case studies will be likely from Monterey, just because Ventura just came out. So if we have an exploit now for Ventura, it means that it's not fixed yet. So, but as soon as they fix it, we will add some to the training. Actually, we have one which we already finished the update, but we are actually waiting on Apple to fix it so we can actually make the release of the update. So
I remember me suggesting maybe we release it before Apple fixes, and you saying not a good idea, Jim. Don't not a good idea. So yeah. So you're a good citizen. You play by the rules. That's definitely appreciated. I'm sure all the Apple police that are watching, they know that they can trust you. So that's good. It's good. It's very, very interesting, awesome stuff. It's certainly something that like I said, I wish I could get some time to go through. This conversation is going live on Twitch right now, but it's also recorded. It's going to show up on the on our YouTube channel. But for those that happen to watch this beforehand, there's the end of year promotion is happening right now, right? So until the end of the year, the course is $500 off, right? So if anybody is interested, this is like the perfect time to sign up. So we never guarantee that we're going to be doing these promotions year by year, but we've only ever done promotions at the end of the year. So so now is definitely the right time to sign up for anyone that's interested in it. Any items that we didn't talk about that you want to make sure that we call out and let people know about?
I think I often see this question on Discord or people asking if what we teach is applicable also for Apple Silicon, just because we use Intel-based VMs, we do the shellcode on x86 and all this, and if it still applies to Apple Silicon as well. And the short answer is yes. Of course, the shellcode is not that Intel specific, although you can run it with Rosetta on Apple Silicon. Right. So that part is Intel specific, but because we teach logic-based vulnerabilities, which is architecture independent, you can take the same concepts, the same idea, and apply it on all the Apple Silicon machines as well. So yeah, you can transfer it. And I think also some people ask if the iOS part, again, we don't do iOS at all in this training, but I think if you learn all of this stuff, again, you have a huge advantage and a big jump start when you start to read or deal with iOS. It has its own specific stuff, but like, again, the sandbox on iOS works 99% the same as on macOS. So once you learned it, you will understand it on both platforms. It's more restrictive on iOS, but which is more platform specific, but it works the same way.
That makes total sense. And so if I remember right, you are going to be doing a demo of the class here soon. Is that next week?
I think 2 weeks.
2 weeks
from
now.
now.
2 weeks from now. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I'm looking forward to that as well. So anyone that wants to see the course in action, they'll definitely want to connect in and watch that one. We'll have the schedule published on the Discord, the specific day and time and all that sort of thing. But it should be probably 2 weeks starting at the same time that we started this one, which is, what was that, 2 p.m. Eastern time. So there we go. Well, let me go. Definitely a pleasure speaking with you. I like to nerd out. I try to control myself. There's a lot of other like stuff along these lines I'd like to bug you about, but maybe we'll save that for next time. So
Okay.
you know,
Well,
keep
thank you.
try to stay on topic a little bit. So yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. And everyone watching, like mentioned, the recording of this chat will be posted up on YouTube. Thank you so much. I see someone in the chat saying that they're taking the course in December, so that's good timing. Good timing. Take advantage of that holiday time off to hack some Macs. So there you go. All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll shut down the stream. We're using Zoom, so you know the drill. No OffSec song music while we're using Zoom. Just arrived, Eni summary. Watch the recording on YouTube. We'll get that posted up on there so you can watch the whole kit caboodle. All right, Csaba. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
All right, adios.